What do you do if you've only got one day to see a major European capital? You do it right. No guidebook, no map, no research. Hi, I'm Jeremy. Thanks for watching. Well, Masayo and I woke up today about 6:30 a.m., a little jet lagged because we just arrived in Stockholm last night. And this is our only day in Stockholm. First thing we did was go looking for Wi-Fi because there was no Wi-Fi in our little below decks room in the Onedin Hostel, which is a big floating boat in Old Town. So we went to the place where they have free Wi-Fi in this hostel, which is the 5th floor stateroom. This place was amazing. First of all, there was nobody else there because nobody else is awake. Nobody else is traveling in Sweden because it's late October. But this room looks like a 19th century captain's quarters or captain's saloon or something. There's dim lighting, there's this kind of faded red carpet, there's these proud old wooden chairs and tables everywhere. There are little cubbyhole views of Stockholm's misty morning harbor right outside Old Town. I personally felt like a 19th century whaler. Part of me wanted to go outside and club some seals to get their oil for our lamps, but thankfully we didn't have to do that. We did, however, need breakfast, so we went across the street to a little place called Albert and Jack's. This was another very Scandinavian place. There were wooden floors, there was a smell of coffee, the morning customers were starting to murmur to each other. They were even playing music. In this case, Stayin' Alive by the Bee Gees. Not exactly Swedish culture, but I'll take it. Fortunately, my blood sugar had been pretty good when I woke up, 131. So here at Albert and Jack's, we were able to have the perfect first meal in Stockholm. Yogurt with fruit and granola, pastries, and of course, coffee. It was cold outside, it was chilly, it was a little bit overcast. We were inside, warm, happy, looking at the colorful walls outside in Old Town. Our only real plan today was just to wander around Old Town, which in Swedish is called Gamlestan. Now, Gamlestan is an amazing place. It's full of these old buildings that tower above you on either side of these narrow, winding cobblestone streets. You just wander around. It doesn't matter where you go because everywhere is extremely picturesque and extremely Scandinavian. At first, everything was still closed, but it didn't matter. We just had the whole place to ourselves. You can wander up and down all the little cobblestone streets, see the sights, usually. And at this time of year, the red and orange leaves are unbelievable. Old Town Stockholm in October is almost criminally atmospheric. Eventually, things started to liven up. There were more cars, more people, more shoppers. Next to a place called Storkyrkan, which is this big old church. I checked my blood sugar again. It was 137 after that meal at Albert and Jack's, which is great. And I like to think this is the first blood sugar photo ever taken in front of this church. I did it for you. We did pass a record store at one point, and I had to duck in to check out what they had. I have a thing I like to do, which is sort of a treasure hunt. I like to see if record stores have any Ray Charles records when I pass them. I have most of Ray's records and I don't need to buy any, I just like to check. Well, in this little record store, I did manage to find some. And as I told you in the last video, I don't care for portents or omens, anything like that. I don't believe in them at all, except when I do. And I thought that finding Ray Charles records in this store in Stockholm, Sweden was another good sign for the trip. And walking around Stockholm, it wasn't just Ray Charles records in a record store, but a lot of the shops had record album covers in their display windows, even for shops that had nothing to do with music. And the records were good stuff. It was my kind of music. It was Rolling Stones and Beatles and The Who and the Kinks, even for like a coffee shop or a shop where you can buy a bunch of cups or something. I had no idea what that was about, but it was as if they had known I was coming and wanted to prepare things for me. Maybe? We stopped in at a place called Cozy Cafe for lunch. My blood sugar here was 92. I had a sandwich and salad with some small cookies and some citronella tea. Had to guess at the Humalog for this because I have no idea what's in bread around the world. I think I know, but we'll see. And yet again, I took my Humalog shot for this meal through my Bluffworks pants into my leg. So I believe that so far every single Humalog shot I've had on this trip, including the airplane yesterday, has been through my pants. Not the recommended technique, but as long as it works, who cares? But a little bit later, back in the 19th century Captain's Saloon, my blood sugar was 307. I blame the sandwiches of Sweden. There, I said it. So, having seen much of the island of Old Town, or Gamlestan, we checked out some of the other islands that you can walk to very easily. For example, Riddarholmen, which means the Knight's Islet, which is very small and has this jumble of like buildings from the 1600s and the remains of old kings and queens and stuff. We also walked to an island called Skeppsholmen, which was very odd because it was like, it had the feel of a university campus during winter break. Buildings were open, there were lights on inside, some things seemed to be happening, but there didn't seem to be any people around. No people working there, and it was just all out of context. As I said, we did no research, we didn't know what this was. We didn't know why there were these strange, colorful sculptures on the lawns. We had no idea why there was a church that was all lit up in red and blue with these little bags of fire outside of it. One thing I love about traveling in this way is that you don't know what anything is. You just have to interpret it yourself and then later research it and find out what was actually going on. But a good trip can be very disorienting, in a good way. We also went to a very small island called Kastelholmen, which is just like a castle island. And this little tiny castle is on it, and there were some people up on the top doing something with the Swedish flag. And we actually met another couple of travelers, and they were taking a Segway tour of Stockholm, and they asked me to take their photo on their iPhone. And they scooted off down the hill on their Segways off to somewhere else. The final island we went to is extremely small, and there's no reason to mention it except I want to try to pronounce it. Helgeandsholmen. That's a guess. Anyway, it's this extremely small little place that holds the Swedish Parliament, but other than that, that's about it. We still needed dinner. We had no plans, we had no ideas, so we just wandered around. We finally found this little area in town that had a few restaurants. There was one restaurant in particular that was really lively. It had a lot of people, we could see them through the window. Usually when you're traveling and you don't know where to go for dinner, you try to find a place where a lot of locals are eating, because that means it's probably very good, it's popular, so it's probably safe, and maybe everything's gonna be fine. But we looked right next door to it, and there was another restaurant. At least the sign said it was a restaurant. The sign was pointing to this little hallway that went back that was kind of dimly lit. We peered inside, there was nobody around, but there was this staircase that went down somewhere. We couldn't tell where. It looked like down to a dungeon or something. And there was a sign in English that said, "Please dare to enter our 700-year-old prison." But it said it was a restaurant. So we said, okay, let's try this place, which is called Café Stenstøre. And it was like going back in time, really. I mean, there was nobody around. It was open, it was a restaurant, there were tables, there were candles on the table that were lit, but there were no customers at any of the tables. There was no staff anywhere. There was a bar, but there was no bartender behind it. We had no idea what was going on. But of course we liked it, so we just sat at the table waiting to see if someone was going to come take our order, and we looked at the surroundings. And everything was made out of brick. It was very old, just like an old Scandinavian dungeon. The ceiling was arched with bricks on it. Everything was very low lit. There were all these weird decorations in these little alcoves and cubby holes on the walls. There were like broken violins and concertinas. There were these candelabras. There were strange masks and busts of people we couldn't identify. There were no cobwebs, but it seemed like there should have been. Finally, some guy came over, and he worked there. And he explained in broken English that this actually was, as the sign promised, some dungeon prison from the 1300s. And he said that a Swedish king had actually been executed here. Which is a very remarkable thing to hear, especially in these circumstances.
Hello, welcome to our ancient Scandinavian dungeon. One of our kings was killed right over here. Can I start you off with an appetizer?
I ordered something very Swedish, and the guy disappeared, apparently to make our order, or to ready the guillotine, we weren't sure. A quick blood sugar check in these amazing surroundings was 118, another perfect reading, and eventually the guy came back with our meals. Mine was excellent. Swedish meatballs, mashed potatoes with lingonberry sauce, and some sparkling water. Swedish meatballs in an old dungeon. It was perfect. I don't know why everybody was in that other restaurant that looked very, comparatively, very boring, very run-of-the-mill. This was the place to be. So that's what you get when you wander around and you don't know what you're doing. You find these amazing things. Not always, but when you do, they're more amazing. So it was a perfect dinner to end our time in Sweden. But we still wanted some dessert. So we walked across Old Town again, and we found a little bit more of a modern coffee shop. We got another sparkling water and some muffins. This was a very quaint place and a good way to truly end our time in Stockholm. There are these old books on the wall, very chilled out atmosphere, only a couple of other customers, and an impertinent fire extinguisher. But what can you do? Because we've been walking all day, I didn't take any Humalog for this muffin, which is why I was 2:38 back in the hostel. Now we're actually leaving Stockholm and Sweden after a single day tomorrow morning on a ferry. We're going to a very strange new place, but unfortunately tomorrow is going to bring some news from my family back home that will threaten this entire trip just as it's starting. The good thing about today was that we got the most out of Stockholm in a single day. And we did no research and had no ideas what was going on, but it all worked out beautifully. The bad thing is that I got my first 300 plus blood sugar of the trip, and it's only day 2. Let's hope there aren't too many more of those. Now I did stop into a store somewhere in Old Town to buy some low blood sugar snacks. I got a bottle of juice, which was too expensive, and a Snickers bar, which is too expensive. Thank you, Sweden. And about the carbohydrate information, the juice actually had English information on it. The Snickers didn't, but it was very easy to understand what was what. Of course, with the blood sugars I had today, I didn't need them, but I did carry it around all day with my insulin and my blood sugar machine in my day pack backpack. You can go anywhere with diabetes.